Hello, this is Kathleen Osborne, and I'm here to interview Daniel Moreno, that we call D.
Yeah, call me D.
And so, D, my big question right now is how did you discover writing?
Um, I first started writing as a small child. I grew up in Humboldt Park, which is a neighborhood in Chicago, and I grew up there in a time where there was much turmoil, if you will. It was like the epicenter for several different competing gangs to kind of vie for control of the area that they were in for purposes of dealing substances and doing crime and all those things. So I grew up right in the middle of that. My parents were preachers, so we were not part of that life. We were just kind of like in the middle of it. And so I didn't get to go outside a lot to play. We had a yard, and I was very fortunate to grow up on a plot that was like a plot and a half. So we had like a long, grassy yard on the side of the house instead of just the grassy plot in the back. So I had a lot of area to play around, but I mean that's all I could play around typically. And so I got into books. I started reading encyclopedias and everything that I could. And as a result, I started to discover words and how they sounded and what they meant and how they played together. And so I started to write things down. I started with poetry, and then I would write I would create like these scenarios with the toys that I had and how they were fighting each other or adventuring. And then I would just like write them little backstories or kind of like write little adventures for them that I could enjoy later.
How cool.
Mhm.
Uh, have you published any of your poetry?
Um, Not on purpose. And I say that so many years ago, I was a teenager, so like 114 years ago. I entered a contest,
Mm-hmm.
and my poem was one of the ones selected for the publication. Could I tell you what that was?
Sure.
No, no, I can't tell you because I don't remember.
That's
It
okay.
was one of those things that like seemed really fun and interesting. But I think like in hindsight, I discovered later that the everyone was a winner and everyone, excuse me, got published.
Oh,
So there's some pamphlet out there with some of my words. But that's it. Not on
yeah.
purpose. I hadn't gone out and sought to be published with my poetry. That was typically more for me
Mm-hmm.
than anything.
Do you still write poetry?
On occasion, yeah, I did parlay that into songwriting for a while, and did perform some of my original works around town. But outside of that, um, the the poetry that I do now is mostly in song form.
Let's
Yeah.
see, I've written poetry, but I've never written a song.
Put a
Um,
little, put a couple music notes to some of those poems. You got songs.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'd collaborate with my girlfriend. She is a incredible pianist, and
Oh, fun.
so yeah, she's written some of her own stuff. But
That's great.
um, I just haven't ever really thought about it. I've always been too intrigued by everybody else's. So,
Hmm.
um, what brought you into short stories?
Actually, it was the pandemic. At the height of the lockdown, um, there was a point where, and I had been an actor for a lot of years. I had been a musician for a lot of years, and so creative expression was something that I had done for a long time. And in part because I feel like I have this need to be expressive and creative and to make things and to do a measure of performing. Um, it in part because I feel like I am naturally I have a natural proclivity to performance and art
Mm-hmm.
in that regard. And so like it felt easy and it felt good in my body. So I did it for a lot of years. But during the lockdown, there was not the opportunity to do any of those things, right? And so I like needed to express myself in some way, shape, or form. So I started a podcast, and it came to be through a Facebook post where I was just kind of itching to make something. So I created this prompt and said, "Hey, if there's a moment in your life where you can see that a decision that you made then has had an impact until now, tell me about it, and I'll write you a super fast little snippet about what life would be like if you made a different choice." Right. So a bunch of people participated, and it was really fun. And I wrote a whole bunch of these, snip snaps. One of my buddies, and I think this interaction is what kind of like inspired me to make a podcast out of it, like and do it on a bigger scale. Um, he like whispered me in DMs and said, "Hey, when I was before I got married, I had this girlfriend, and she told me she was pregnant. She ended up not being pregnant, or like she ended up either losing it or wasn't pregnant, and they ended up breaking up, and he left, and he ended up meeting his wife, later on, and so now he's super happy. But he's like, I don't think about it often, but this question brought me back to that moment. And, like what if I was a dad, at 16, sort of thing. And so I was like, well, shoot. Okay. And so I gave it some thought and I wrote it out. And like I didn't share it publicly. I shared them all publicly except this one. This one I just gave to him. And so we had this little moment back and forth where we talked about it. And he was like, interested in like how things could have come to be. And, he was, um, like really excited about how there was still this tumultuous kind of experience between them, even though they stayed together, they raised this kid. And so it was fun. It felt really good. And so from there I was like, you know what, I want to keep doing this. I want to do this. How do I do that? Right. So I started thinking about, what can I do? And the idea of a podcast popped up in my brain hole. And so I was like, oh yeah, yeah, let's do that. And I had done a voice work at home. And so like this mic is an example of me preparing for doing voice work here at home, as part of, acting. And so I was like, okay, I have some equipment. Let's do it. Let's do it. What am I even going to do? So I kind of opened up the thought of that, and so the podcast itself is part conversation slash interview,
Mhm.
part storytelling, and it's recorded in two parts. The first part is the interview. I find out, and before like the guest comes on, I'll ask him like, "Hey, what's this moment?" Right? Think about that moment. I'm going to ask you on the show, but think about that moment, right? And so we'll talk. How you doing? What are you into? How are things going with life? I try and do research on everybody so I know what's happening in their life at that moment. I can ask them about that, and then we pause and I'm like, all right, so tell me this. Tell me this moment, right? So we talk through that, and then from there we break, and I take the weekend to write a flash fiction story about it. And then we get back together, record me reading it to them and their reaction. And that's like what it turned into. But the idea of short stories was the lockdown, getting stir crazy, needing to create, and prompting Facebook to help me figure out how to deal with that.
How did you come to us at Transcendent Authors?
Well, one of my guests, Henya, um, she after we had gone through the whole bit, we recorded it. I read her the story, we talked about it, she sent me her book, I read it, we chatted about that. And then she's like, hey, I know a few writers that are trying to put together a collection of short stories, and I'm not going to be able to participate. I did in a previous one, but I can't participate. If you're interested, I'd be happy to pass your information along. And so I was like, yeah, I don't know what that means, but yes, let's do it. And so, yeah, so she passed my info off to you. We chatted for a bit, and like I joined the group, the Transcendent Authors. Although we didn't have a name back then, I don't think.
No, we didn't.
Yeah.
We didn't have a name back then. We hadn't gotten that organized. It
Yeah.
was still at the point of um, figuring out which way we were going to go.
Hmm.
In fact, you made the cover for that book,
I
Autumn.
did. Autumn.
Yes,
Yeah.
you did.
Agree.
And things have moved way farther along. And we have only about 3 or 4 of the original authors still involved.
Mm.
Yeah, we have Jonathan, Anna, myself, and Jane.
Mm.
But
Oh,
everybody else,
Dina wasn't in the first one?
no,
Oh, no
mm-mm.
kidding. So
No,
she and I
she
joined at the
came.
same time.
Uh-huh.
Ah,
Yep.
wow.
Yeah. So, and we're such an eclectic group that it works. It's like
Yeah.
every part of your body is in itself its own world,
Hmm.
for the arm, for the, whatever.
Yeah.
But when you put them together, they work. And
Hmm.
so us together work.
Yeah.
If In fact, I'm going to be teaching about us.
Oh, really? What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean?
I got asked to speak at a conference, and I had just got notified last Thursday. No, it was Friday that I was slated to speak, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Hmm.
And so I'm talking about working collaborative
Oh, cool.
with other authors and creating anthologies.
That's great.
So I'm pretty excited about it. It was
Cool.
easy to work out my papers because you guys are so good.
Mm-hmm.
um, I was going to ask you,
Mm-hmm.
what do you like the most about short stories?
Um, for me, short stories are fun because you can pick up at any point and cut out at any point. And
Mm-hmm.
as long as you kind of create an arc for the characters inside that bit, um, you can leave it there. And that's super fun. Because like the temptation to give like very in-depth backstory and very like thoughtful and extended world building, you don't have the time for that.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the space. So coming up with what's important right away is exciting, and being able to just give these breaths, to a few characters and then take it away and move on to something else is for me really exciting, because it also fits the notion of, the short form performance that I have done historically, a lot of commercial work, and so that all of that exists just in a moment. Like the songwriting, I feel typically takes place in a moment because of an emotional reaction to a thing, whether
Mm-hmm.
you are excited about something or really sad about something, you're anticipating, you're fearful, all of those things, but you're having this, moment, right, and kind of experiencing that. So I love that about short stories, is being able to pluck,
Mm-hmm.
something out and then just really enjoy that thing that you plucked.
What is the shortest short story you've written?
The shortest short story? Hmm. It was probably, yeah, it
How
was
many
definitely
words?
one of the like less than 500.
Mm-hmm.
So like super super flash
Mm-hmm.
fiction. It was one of the like the Facebook prompt short stories, like the
Mm-hmm.
little nuggets that I wrote. And it was all about just like the tail end of a basketball game, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Now, one
yeah.
of the short stories, flash fiction that I've written, it was 300 words,
Mm,
and the prompt was red lipstick.
mm,
So I'm was the only one that I wrote that didn't have aliens in it.
Ooh.
And it was a murder mystery. So
Ah,
um, I haven't ever published that one.
uh-huh.
So um, what kind of advice would you offer to a writer that is interested in going into short stories?
Um, are they are already a writer, or they're someone that's interested in starting writing, period,
They're
and short
interested.
stories just happens to be what they're interested
Uh,
in writing?
yeah.
It's the second one. So they're not already a
Mm-hmm.
writer that does long form and they want to,
No, no.
no? Ah,
They're just because so many of the people that are that started with me in 2020
mm-hmm.
had never written or published anything until
Mm,
that we did tolerance.
gotcha. Okay. Wow.
So,
Okay. Yeah. So my advice to someone who's not a writer that wants to start writing and wants to write short stories is imagine the things you want to tell are what you remember from a dream.
uh,
So when you have a dream and you wake up, right? The dream is a snippet of something, right? You remember a snippet, right? There's that trope. I was like, oh, I was in class and I was naked and I was so embarrassed and I couldn't get home, or I was trying to run away from something and I was like in place and I could not get my legs moving. Things of that nature, right? You have this moment. Everything about this the circumstances is accepted as this is the reality, right? So when you wake up, you're not like, why was I in a room with blue walls? I don't even have blue walls. That's so stupid. It irrelevant, right? Like
mm-hmm,
the world building necessary to for it to make sense inside of us, we're just accepting that this is real. This moment we are accepting is real. So if you think of like the stories that you want to tell as what you remember from a dream, you can build this image of this moment without getting kind of like tripped up on, well, I have to do all of this backstory and I have to do all of this building or else it's not going to make world building rather. So it's because it's not going to make sense if it's not. But with short stories, we give a lot of grace to the writers because we are accepting that the background is real, right? And if you introduce something about it, we accept it because we know that the time that we have with you in these words is so short that the effort to justify everything happening will take away from the moment that we're trying to share. That's the advice.
what is your favorite genre to write in?
You know what? I thought that my favorite genre was going to be like action adventure. But I think that I am finding myself more um, that things flow better when I'm writing suspense and when I'm writing like very emotional moments. Like the type of emotional moment where our capacity is like grossly inadequate to deal with the emotions of whatever is happening. So whether that is somebody that is bursting with joy or unimaginable heartbreak or fear or confusion, like I really fall into those. And so I think I'm finding myself more motivated to write suspense and then otherwise just like incredibly emotional moments. And that's sometimes there's a little bit of romance, sometimes there's a little bit of horror, sometimes, you know, that sort of thing. And so I always figured I would just do action adventure, but I suspense is suspense and emotional moments, which could lead to different genres, but that facet of writing is what I'm focusing most on right now.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I know I use several different thesauruses uh, that deal with emotions and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't show a lot of emotion for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
and didn't share it
Mm,
either. So learning how to share is a challenge,
mm.
something like that. I want you to know we enjoy your presence
Oh, thank
in
you.
our group. You really add depth.
Yeah, thank you.
And I want to recommend something to you.
Mm,
Um, I can't remember his name. He's a buddy of John Mayberry.
mm,
I don't know if you know of him or not. He's a science fiction thriller, does all that sort of stuff.
mm,
Um, but his friend owns a Shakespearean theater on
mm.
Broadway. And I went through a class with him on learning how to read from my book publicly. And I think that you would do that an excellent job in something like that. In
Like reading from my own books.
reading for your own books, but teaching other people how to read from theirs.
Oh, mm,
They don't know how. They don't know that there's a narrative voice, that there is a voice for the character,
mm,
there is a voice for the other characters, an inner voice and an outer voice,
mm.
things like that. And I mean, he charged. So I'm just saying,
Heard.
wouldn't hurt your shoulder.
This is true. This is true.
Anyway, I want to just thank you for this opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. And I hope more people will listen to it
Oh, dope. Well, thank
and
you.
come
I
to know you.
appreciate that.
By the
Yeah.
way,
Yes.
what is your website?
My website is www.danielmoreno.me.
Okay.
danielmoreno.me, and that has so it has a couple things. It has my podcast. So
Mm-hmm.
like 54 episodes of the podcast are on there. They're long, right? Because there's like a conversation and then the reading of a story and then some more conversation. So I feel like they're between like 45 minutes and an hour and change. So
Mm-hmm.
they're chatty, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But also you have access to some of I did this, and this was like in 2019, winter of 2019. I had a dream, and I was like, oh, I want to write a story about this, but I want to do it in like journal entry form, right? And
Okay.
so they're journal entries, and they're about this kid named Diego who discovers that he can teleport, but um, eventually he learns that his teleportation is not exactly moving from one place to another.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Oh my. That sounds good. Sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to have our web designer
Mm-hmm.
post that information, or at least your address,
Sure.
so that people can find it.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.